the administrator of the elite clinic put a price tag on her son, $15,000 for admission. And when she carried him in her arms, she found out that the child was being sent to a ward that the management did not specifically repair. Because that's how they solve the problem with poor patients. But he did not know that this mother, exhausted, fed someone who knows all his dirty secrets. And now she just needs to dial 7 numbers to make his whole perfect life crumble. The automatic doors of City General spat Elena into fluorescent brightness. She staggered forward, Mateo's weight dragging at her spine, his small body pressed against her back in a makeshift carry. His breath rasped wet and shallow against her neck. The fever radiated through his thin cotton shirt, hot enough to burn. She made it 3 steps before Administrator Miller materialized from his glass-walled office. He moved with the unhurried precision of a man who owned time itself, tablet cradled in one palm, eyes scanning her torn denim and the mud caked on her factory boots. No premium insurance wristband. No leather purse. No polished veneer of solvency. Miller stopped directly in her path, shoes gleaming under the harsh LEDs. The intensive care unit is a capacity for unfunded cases. His voice carried the flat monotone of a recorded message. We require a deposit of $15,000 before admission. Elena shifted Mateo higher on her back, ignoring the protest in her shoulders. His fever is 104. He needs antivirals. Now. Hospital policy. She tried to sidestep. Miller's arm shot out, rigid as a turnstile, blocking the corridor to the inner wards. His hand landed on her shoulder, fingers pressing down with condescending firmness, attempting to steer her toward the exit. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the bus exhaust still clinging to her coat. Behind Miller, the safety yellow lines on the waxed linoleum stretched toward the treatment rooms like arteries pumping life to those who could afford the transfusion. Ma'am, if you refuse to leave voluntarily, I will call for trespass removal. Mateo's eyelids fluttered. A small, broken sound escaped his throat. Elena's vision narrowed to a single point, the hallway beyond Miller's expensive suit. She dropped her shoulder and drove forward. Miller's polished shoes skidded on the too-clean floor. He crashed backward into a row of bolted plastic chairs, the tablet clattering from his grip. Elena sprinted, boots squeaking on linoleum, Mateo bouncing against her spine. She spotted a senior nurse near the triage station, gray hair, tired eyes, hands already reaching out in the universal gesture of medical reflex. Elena thrust Mateo into those capable arms. Mateo Reyes. 8 years old. Fever spiking. Respiratory distress. He needs. The heavy security doors behind her hissed open. Miller's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with authority. Stop her. 2 guards materialized, hands already reaching for her jacket. Elena pivoted, her factory-trained instincts reading exits faster than conscious thought. The service door glowed red in her peripheral vision. She lunged for it, shouldering through into a concrete stairwell that reeked of cigarette smoke and desperation. The metal door slammed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid. Cold air hit her face as she burst onto the exterior steps. Night swallowed the city in shades of gray and sodium yellow. Her lungs burned. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and indifference sat a discount pharmacy where she could beg for antivirals without the hospital's ransom price. 3 steps down, the scene stopped her cold. A man hunched on the landing, wrapped in a tattered overcoat 3 sizes too large. His beard grew wild and unkempt, his face mapped with dirt and old scars. 2 security guards loomed over him, their high-visibility vests bright against the shadows. The larger guard nudged the man's ribs with his boot. Time to move along, buddy. Black cars coming through. Can't have you stinking up the curb. The second guard held a water bottle poised over a small pile of belongings, a blanket, a pair of split shoes, something wrapped in newspaper. Last warning. The man on the ground, Elias, though Elena had no way of knowing his name, trembled. His eyes held a distant, clouded quality, focused on something far beyond the concrete and cruelty. Elena's hands curled into fists. She had shoved an administrator. She had abandoned protocol. She had already crossed every line that separated the desperate from the criminal. One more transgression wouldn't matter. She stepped between the guard's raised boot and the trembling men. "Leave him alone." The guards turned, surprise flickering across their faces before hardening into contempt. The larger one, a man with a neck too thick for his collar, sneered. "You want to join the stray in holding? Move along." Elena spread her arms wide, creating a human barrier. Her breath came in visible puffs, her jacket torn at the shoulder from Miller's grip. She met the guard's eyes with the same fierce, unyielding defiance she had learned on factory floors where backing down meant getting crushed by machinery. The guard's patience snapped. He reached for her jacket, intending to hurl her aside like trash. Elena read the movement in the shift of his weight. She planted her boots on the salt-stained concrete and shoved, two-handed, against his chest. The guard's expensive tactical boots found no purchase on the uneven stairs. He stumbled backward into his partner, both men cursing as they fought for balance. The chaos bought her seconds. Maybe 10. Maybe less. Elena dropped to her knees beside Elias, her hands already reaching into her coat pocket. Her fingers found the crumpled paper parcel, the single piece of dense rye bread she had saved for dinner, wrapped in wax paper that crinkled like dead leaves. She pressed it into his cold, calloused hands. No words. No explanation. The guards would recover soon, and she needed to disappear into the city's darker veins before they could radio for backup. She started to rise. Elias's hand snapped out, clamping around her wrist with shocking strength. The grip was iron, absolute, pinning her in place as surely as handcuffs. The vacant expression vanished from his face. His eyes cleared, focusing on her with an intensity that made the winter air feel suddenly thin. Elena tried to pull away. His fingers tightened. He leaned close enough that she could smell the city's grime on him mixed with something else, leather, expensive cologne buried under weeks of neglect. When he spoke, his voice lost its tremor. The words came out low and rhythmic, each syllable weighted with terrible clarity. 4. 9. 2. 0. 8. 5. 1. He paused, ensuring the numbers carved themselves into her memory. 4. 9. 2. 0. 8. 5. 1. The guards behind them shouted, their boots scraping concrete as they regained their footing. Elias pulled her closer, his lips inches from her ear. "Do not let the men in white take the boy to room 402. Elena's heart stopped. The boy. Matteo. She had never mentioned Matteo. She had never spoken his name within earshot of this stranger. The numbers in her head suddenly felt heavier, more significant, a key to a lock she couldn't yet see. "How do you?" "Room 402 is where things go to be forgotten." His voice cracked with desperate urgency. "Once he crosses that threshold, he will be lost. 4. 9. 2. 0. 8. 5. 1. Remember." Light flooded the landing. Flashlight beams cut through the shadows, illuminating Elena's kneeling form. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs, not the guards from before, but reinforcements. The hospital security team, summoned by Miller's radio call. Hands seized Elena's shoulders, wrenching her upward. Her wrist tore free from Elias's grip as someone tackled her against the cold concrete. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Metal cuffs bit into her wrists, clicking shut behind her back. Assaulting hospital staff. Disorderly conduct. Resisting. The voices blurred together, professional and mechanical. Elena twisted her head, searching the landing for Elias. Empty. The tattered coat, the newspaper-wrapped belongings, the man himself, gone. Vanished into the shadows as if he had never existed. Only the wax paper from her bread remained, fluttering in the cold wind like a discarded prayer. The guards hauled Elena to her feet. Someone read her rights in a bored monotone. Someone else radioed for transport. Through the chaos, through the clicking handcuffs and shouted commands, 7 numbers burned in Elena's mind with the weight of prophecy. 4. 9. 2 0 8 5 1. Room 402. Matteo. Elena stopped struggling. She let them guide her toward the waiting police car, its lights painting the concrete in shades of red and blue. Her son was inside the hospital, surrounded by men in white coats, and she had no way to reach him. But she had the numbers. And somewhere in the shadows, a man who shouldn't have known about Matteo had given her a weapon she didn't yet understand. The security guard released Elena at the pediatric wing entrance with a warning snarl and a radio check to confirm she was contained. She pushed through the double doors, sweat cooling on her spine, and scanned the corridor for Matteo. The medical team had already arrived. A nurse with steel gray hair and lips pressed into a disapproving line worked methodically, unhooking monitor leads from Matteo's pale chest. The boy lay motionless under a thin blanket, his breathing shallow beneath the fogged plastic of an oxygen mask. The wheeled gurney stood ready, its chrome rails gleaming under the unforgiving LEDs. Elena approached, her boots silent on the waxed floor. "Where are you taking him?" The nurse didn't lift her gaze from the digital chart mounted on the gurney's footboard. "Private recovery suite. 4th floor." "Which room?" "We're short-staffed. You'll be notified when he's settled." The nurse released the brake lever. The gurney's wheels clicked into motion with a mechanical precision that made Elena's stomach clench. She moved closer, scanning the hallway signage, directional arrows pointing toward the ICU, room numbers ascending in neat increments. Her eyes dropped to the clipboard clipped to the gurney's side rail. Bold red ink circled a number, 402. The words Elias had whispered on the concrete steps detonated in her skull. "Do not let the men in white take the boy to room 402. The cryptic warning transformed into immediate, visceral dread. Elena's hand shot out, wrapping around the cold metal railing, her calloused fingers locking tight. "Not that room." The nurse finally looked up, her expression shifting from professional detachment to irritation. "Excuse me. There's something wrong with room 402. Change it." "Ms. Reyes, I understand you're under stress, but..." "Change the room." Elena's grip tightened, her knuckles bleaching white. The gurney stopped moving, anchored by a mother's desperate strength. The nurse's hand drifted toward the wall-mounted intercom. "You need to let go. Listen to me. Let go of the gurney, or I will call security." Elena searched the woman's face for a flicker of understanding, some acknowledgement that this wasn't hysteria but survival instinct honed on factory floors where hesitation meant injury. She found nothing. The nurse saw only a combative parent who had already assaulted an administrator. The nurse pressed the intercom button. "Code Gray, West Wing. 4th floor." The alarm shattered the sterile comm, a shrill, pulsing wail that bounced off tile and glass. Down the corridor, heads turned. Footsteps thundered from the stairwell. Elena released the railing and stepped away from Matteo, watching the nurse resume pushing the gurney toward the elevator bank. The boy's pale face disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the oppressive brightness of the ICU wing. 2 guards burst through the double doors, their shoulders broad enough to fill the hallway. They spotted Elena and charged without breaking stride. She ran. The polished linoleum offered no grip. Elena's boots slid as she pivoted, her factory-trained instincts calculating exits and obstacles faster than conscious thought. She sprinted down the west corridor, lungs burning, the guards' heavy footfalls echoing close enough to feel the vibration through the floor. A rolling laundry bin sat abandoned near the service elevators. Elena shoved it with both hands, sending it careening into the path of her pursuers. The crash bought her seconds, 10, 15, as they cursed and kicked through the scattered linens. The corridor branched. Elena veered left, following the safety yellow lines toward the older section of the hospital where the walls bore water stains and the ceiling tiles sagged. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her vision tunneling to a single focus: find another way to Matteo before they dragged her out in handcuffs. A heavy gray door materialized on her right, marked, "Maintenance, authorized personnel only," in faded stencil letters. She grabbed the handle. It clicked open. Elena dove inside and pulled the door shut, pressing her weight against it as the guards' shadows passed the frosted glass window. Their shouts receded, growing fainter as they continued down the main corridor, assuming she had fled toward the emergency exit. Darkness swallowed her. Elena slumped against the door, her chest heaving, sweat mixing with the grime of the city still coating her skin. The smell hit her, industrial floor wax, grease, and the metallic tang of old pipes. She waited, counting heartbeats, listening for the return of heavy boots. Silence. Her eyes adjusted. The closet stretched deeper than she had expected, cluttered with mop buckets and chemical bottles arranged on rusted shelving. At the far end, barely visible in the dim glow from a single emergency bulb, sat a metal structure too large to be storage. Elena moved closer, her hands outstretched in the darkness. Her fingers brushed cold steel. A gate. She traced its outline, vertical bars, a sliding mechanism. A service lift, the kind built for moving heavy equipment between floors without clogging the public elevators. She pulled the gate open. It rattled on ancient tracks, the sound too loud in the confined space. Elena stepped onto the metal platform, the mesh floor groaning under her weight. She searched for controls and found a simple lever, up, down, neutral. She pulled it down. The lift shuddered and began to descend with agonizing slowness, bypassing the first floor, then the ground level, dropping deeper into the hospital's forgotten infrastructure. The shaft walls were brick and exposed piping, streaked with rust and decades of neglect. The lift clanged to a halt. The gate opened onto darkness. Elena stepped out into a cavernous space that smelled of damp paper and ozone. Emergency lighting cast an orange glow across rows of towering filing cabinets, their metal surfaces pitted with rust. Stacks of cardboard boxes leaned against the walls, water-damaged and bloated. This was the archive basement, the hospital's paper grave, where records too old or too damaging for digitization were left to rot. Elena moved through the narrow aisles, her footsteps echoing on damp concrete. The ceiling hung low, crisscrossed with sweating pipes wrapped in tattered insulation. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped into a bucket with metronomic persistence. A desk emerged from the shadows near the back wall, cluttered with yellowed papers and broken office equipment. Elena approached, scanning the surface for anything useful, a phone, a map, an exit route. Her eyes locked onto a clipboard. The header read, "High-risk liability, maintenance pending." Elena lifted it with trembling hands. The document listed room numbers in the left column, mechanical failures in the right. Her finger traced down the entries until it reached the one that made her blood freeze. Room 402, primary oxygen line, intermittent enrichment. Flammable environment risk. Sensor failure. Below the technical description, a handwritten note scrawled in hasty cursive, defer repair. Overcapacity protocol. Prioritize revenue-generating suites. At the bottom of the page, a signature, sharp, arrogant, unmistakable. Administrator Miller's name in thick black ink. Elena's hands shook. The hospital had known. They had documented the danger, weighed the risk, and decided profit mattered more than the lives of patients who couldn't pay. Room 402 was a ticking bomb, and they had been placing indigent patients inside it for months. Mateo was being wheeled into a death trap. Elena grabbed the clipboard and sprinted toward the heavy steel exit door at the far end of the basement. Her boots splashed through puddles, her shoulder slamming into filing cabinets as she navigated the maze of rusted metal. She reached the door and seized the handle, wrenching it upward. It refused to budge. A metallic thud echoed from the other side, the sound of a deadbolt sliding home. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She yanked the handle again, throwing her weight against the door. The steel didn't move. Panic clawed up her spine as the reality sank in. She was trapped. She pounded her fists against the door, the impacts echoing through the empty basement. Help! Someone opened the door. A shadow fell across the small wire-reinforced glass pane set into the door at eye level. Elena pressed her face close to the glass, peering through into the brightly lit hallway beyond. Administrator Miller stood on the other side, his charcoal suit immaculate, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the fluorescent lights. He didn't appear angry or hurried. He wore a smirk. Miller reached into his breast pocket with deliberate slowness and withdrew a master key, holding it up so Elena could see it clearly through the glass. He turned it in his fingers, letting the metal catch the light, before sliding it into his pocket with a pat that felt like a dismissal. Elena beat the glass with her palms. "Let me out." Miller leaned closer to the pane, his expression cold and satisfied. His lips moved, the words muffled by the soundproof steel but unmistakable in their intent. "Accidents in the ICU are unfortunate but statistically inevitable." He tapped his watch, a gold piece that gleamed against his pale wrist, signaling time slipping away. Elena screamed, slamming her shoulder against the door, but the steel absorbed the impact without a tremor. Miller straightened, adjusted his tie, and turned away. His polished shoes clicked on the linoleum as he walked into the brightness of the hallway, disappearing from view. The archive basement settled into suffocating silence. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the surface. Above her, separated by concrete and indifference, Matteo was being wheeled into room 402. The door had closed on her son. Another door had locked her away from him. She was trapped in the hospital's grave, surrounded by evidence of its negligence, while the only person she had left in the world lay unconscious in a room designed to kill him. The clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. In the dim orange glow, 7 numbers burned in her memory like a lifeline she didn't yet understand how to grasp. 4, 9, 2, 0, 8, 5, 1. Elena's hands closed around the cold iron of a pipe wrench buried beneath a layer of rust and forgotten tools. The weight settled into her calloused palms with satisfying purpose. She didn't think. She swung. The wrench collided with the deadbolt in an explosion of sparks. The impact reverberated up her arms, setting her teeth on edge. She swung again. Again. The clanging echoed through the archive basement like a war drum, metal against metal, desperation against engineering. The bolt sheared away on the 7th strike. Elena wrenched the door open and burst into the service corridor, sprinting through fluorescent brightness toward the stairwell. Her lungs screamed. Her legs trembled. She climbed 3 floors in a blur of concrete and emergency lighting, emerging into the familiar antiseptic hell of the pediatric wing. The transport team moved with bureaucratic slowness near the end of the corridor, positioning Matteo's gurney perpendicular to a doorway. Room 402. The yellowed oxygen caution sign hung at eye level like a death sentence. "Wait." Elena's voice cracked, raw from shouting. The nurses turned, startled. Elena closed the distance in seconds, her boots squeaking on waxed linoleum. She seized the gurney's chrome railing and shoved with the accumulated strength of a woman who had spent years hauling machinery on factory floors. The gurney rolled 5 feet down the hall. "What are you?" Clerical error. Elena positioned the gurney in front of room 405, breathing hard. Intake desk called. Last-minute update. The lead nurse frowned, scanning her digital tablet for confirmation. The other nurse, younger and overwhelmed by the chaos of a double shift, simply shrugged and began wheeling Matteo through the correct doorway. Elena followed, her hands trembling as she watched them reconnect monitors and adjust the forward drip. The steady hum of a functional oxygen concentrator filled the room. Clean. Safe. Working. Elena collapsed into the bedside chair, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Matteo's color began to return beneath the translucent mask, his chest rising and falling with reassuring rhythm. For one shimmering moment, Elena believed she had won. The double doors at the end of the wing slammed open. Administrator Miller entered flanked by 2 police officers, their uniforms crisp and badges gleaming under the LEDs. A hospital legal aide trailed behind, clutching a tablet to her chest. Miller's charcoal suit remained immaculate despite the hour, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh light as he pointed a steady finger at Elena. "That's her. The woman who assaulted my staff and sabotaged hospital property." The officers moved with practiced efficiency, crossing the room in seconds. Elena stood, placing herself between them and Matteo's bed. "I can explain." "Ma'am, you need to come with us." The room was dangerous. Room 402 has a faulty oxygen line. Ma'am. The larger officer's hand closed around her upper arm. Don't make this harder. Elena twisted against his grip, her other hand reaching for Matteo. Her fingers brushed his small, warm hand before the second officer seized her opposite arm. They hauled her out of the chair with mechanical indifference. No. Listen to me, Miller has been placing patients in rooms he knows are dangerous. You have the right to remain silent. Elena's screams tore through the sterile hallway as they dragged her toward the exit. Her boots scraped against linoleum, her shoulders wrenching against the officer's iron grips. She craned her neck toward Matteo's room, watching his small form disappear behind the closing door. Miller stood in the corridor, arms crossed, wearing the same satisfied smirk he had displayed through the basement door's glass pane. The intake room at the precinct smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Elena sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, handcuffs biting into her wrists. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with irregular pulses, casting the windowless space in shades of institutional green. She whispered the numbers under her breath. 4, 9, 2, 0, 8, 5, 1. The rhythm provided something to anchor herself against the rising tide of panic. Matteo was alone. Vulnerable. Miller could arrange another accident, claim mechanical failure, and Elena would be rotting in holding while her son suffocated. The door opened. A man entered carrying a leather briefcase, his slate gray suit tailored to perfection. He moved with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. Elena Reyes. She lifted her head. Marcus Vane. Legal representative. He set the briefcase on the table with a soft click, extracting several documents and spreading them across the scarred surface. I'm here to expedite your release and ensure your son receives continued care. Relief flooded through Elena's exhausted body. Someone had seen through Miller's lies. Someone with authority, with resources. I need you to sign here, here, and here. Vane produced an expensive pen, placing it beside the documents. His voice carried a rehearsed smoothness, the cadence of someone who closed deals for a living. Standard release forms. Once processed, we can address the hospital's concerns and reunite you with Matteo. Elena leaned forward, scanning the first page. Legal jargon swam before her eyes, whereas and party of the first part and notwithstanding. Her gaze dropped to the bottom of the third page, where the fine print condensed into smaller type. Her blood froze. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. Confession to felony assault. This wasn't a release. This was surrender. Miller's final move to strip her of any legal standing to protect Matteo or challenge the hospital's negligence. Elena jerked away from the table, the pen clattering to the floor. I'm not signing this. Vane's polished expression cracked. The sympathetic lawyer vanished, replaced by something predatory. He lunged across the table, his hand seizing Elena's shackled wrists. You don't have a choice. Elena twisted, throwing her weight against his grip. Vane produced a pre-inked stamp pad from his jacket pocket, prying at her thumb. He intended to force her print onto the signature line, creating a verified mark of consent without her cooperation. Elena kicked the table. The metal edge slammed into Vane's shins. He cursed, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Elena wrenched her hands free and swung the handcuff chain, striking his reaching fingers. Vane stumbled, his hip colliding with the briefcase. The leather case toppled off the table, spilling its contents across the grimy linoleum. Files scattered. Tablets bounced. Personal correspondence fanned out like discarded playing cards. Vane dropped to his knees, scrambling to recover the sensitive documents. Elena pressed herself against the corner of the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her eyes darted across the scattered papers, searching for anything she could use as leverage. A glossy newspaper clipping caught her attention, partially obscured beneath a manila folder. Elena's heart stopped. The photograph showed a man in a bespoke tuxedo, vibrant and commanding, his hair perfectly groomed, his eyes sharp with the confidence of someone who owns cities. She recognized the bone structure beneath the expensive grooming. The same man who had crouched on the hospital steps, wrapped in a tattered overcoat, whispering numbers with terrifying clarity. Elias. The headline above the photograph screamed in bold type. Elias Thorne, billionaire philanthropist declared legally dead after 3-year disappearance. Elena's vision tunneled. The numbers burned in her mind with new significance. 4, 9, 2, 0, 8, 5, 1. Not a random string. An access code. A dead man's legacy. Vane snatched the clipping away, stuffing it into his briefcase with vicious efficiency. He rose, straightening his suit jacket, his expression cold. "You're making a mistake." Elena met his eyes. "Get out. You'll lose the boy. Get out." Vane gathered the remaining documents, shoving them into his briefcase without care. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Miller always wins, Ms. Reyes. He owns the city." The door slammed shut. Elena slumped against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid to the floor, handcuffs clinking against the painted cinder block. The photograph of Elias Thorne burned in her memory, the man the world believed was dead, the man who had pressed a piece of rye bread into his hands and warned her about room 402. The man who had given her 7 numbers. Elena closed her eyes, letting the digits cycle through her mind like a mantra. 4, 9, 2, 0, 8, 5, 1. Somewhere in those numbers lived a weapon powerful enough to challenge Miller's empire. She didn't understand how. She didn't understand why a billionaire ghost had chosen her. She only understood she was out of options. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting the intake room in sickly green shadows. Through the scratched plexiglass window in the door, Elena could see the precinct sergeant's desk 6 blocks from the hospital where Mateo lay vulnerable. Elena pressed her forehead against her shackled hands and whispered the numbers again, willing them to transform from mystery into salvation. The door to the holding area opened with a hydraulic hiss. Administrator Miller entered, his charcoal suit immaculate despite the hour, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the sickly fluorescent light. The sergeant stepped aside, granting Miller the privacy his position demanded. Miller settled into the chair across from Elena with deliberate slowness, placing a heavy leather-bound file on the scarred table between them. He laced his fingers together, studying her with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Let's dispense with pretense, Ms. Reyes." Elena said nothing. The handcuffs bit into her wrists. Miller opened the file, revealing page after page of dense legal text. Elias Thorne was declared legally dead 3 years ago. His philanthropic trust, worth approximately $800 million, reverts to the hospital board upon finalization of his death certificate. The board has graciously agreed to use those funds to modernize City General. He's alive. According to whom? Miller's smile was surgical. A confused vagrant. A hallucination born from your stress. You saw a man who resembled a deceased billionaire. Nothing more. Elena's fingers curled into fists despite the restraints. I spoke to him. He warned me about room 402. Ah, yes. Your conspiracy theory. Miller pulled a document from the file, sliding it across the table. Here's the maintenance report for room 402. Signed off by 3 independent inspectors. The room is perfectly safe. Your accusation is slander. The document bore Miller's signature at the bottom, the same arrogant scrawl she had seen on the liability clipboard in the archive basement. Falsified. Official. Airtight. You're lying. Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping to a soft, measured monotone. I'm protecting the hospital. You, however, are a variable. The only person who claims to have seen Elias Thorne alive during his fugue state. If your testimony triggers a forensic audit, years of careful asset management will unravel. The board will face federal prosecution. Hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. You're stealing from a dead man. I'm preserving an institution. Miller tapped the file with one manicured finger. This is a guarantor and non-disclosure agreement. Sign it, and Mateo receives the finest care available. Refuse, and he returns to room 402 tonight. The oxygen sensors are remotely controlled. Accidents happen. Elena's blood froze. The threat hung in the air between them, unadorned by euphemism. You're going to kill my son. I'm going to allow mechanical failure to run its natural course. Miller produced an expensive pen, setting it beside the document. Unless you sign. Elena stared at the file. Page after page of legal language designed to cage her forever, forced admissions of delusion, waivers of liability, non-disclosure clauses with criminal penalties. She would become an accomplice to Miller's fraud, silenced by her own signature. Miller stood, gathering the file. The intake room is too public. Let's discuss this in a more private setting. He gestured toward the side exit, a narrow hallway leading to the precinct's loading dock. Elena rose on unsteady legs, her factory-trained instincts screaming warnings as Miller's hand closed around her upper arm. He guided her past the main desk, where Sergeant Vance processed paperwork with mechanical indifference, toward the dimly lit corridor. The hallway smelled of mildew and old coffee. A yellow wet floor sign leaned against the wall near the exit, ignored by maintenance. Miller carried his heavy metal-trimmed briefcase in his free hand, his grip loose and confident as they walked. Elena slowed her pace. Miller noticed, his fingers tightening on her arm. Keep moving. Elena's eyes tracked the briefcase, the weight distribution, the angle of his wrist, the uneven linoleum beneath his polished shoes. Years of factory work had taught her to read machinery, to understand leverage and momentum. Miller wasn't machinery, but the principles remained identical. She dropped low. Her foot hooked behind Miller's ankle in a sweeping arc, the same motion she had used to clear jammed industrial looms when the foreman wasn't watching. Miller's center of gravity shifted forward, his expensive shoes losing traction on the slick floor. He flailed, reaching for the wall. Elena caught the briefcase mid-fall. She twisted, driving the metal-reinforced corner into the small of Miller's spine as he crashed onto the linoleum. The impact drove the air from his lungs with a wet gasp. Elena threw her weight onto the briefcase, pinning the administrator beneath her knees and the combined mass of leather and steel. Miller wheezed, his face pressed against the cold floor. You. Sergeant. Elena's voice cracked through the hallway like a whip. Sergeant Vance. Heavy footsteps thundered from the main desk. Sergeant Vance rounded the corner, sidearm drawn, his face a mask of procedural alarm. He took in the scene, Elena straddling Miller, the briefcase crushing the administrator's back, Miller's fingers scrabbling uselessly against the linoleum. Don't move. Vance's voice carried the flat authority of a man who had spoken those words 10,000 times. Either of you. The briefcase. Elena refused to release her grip despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. It contains evidence. Hospital records. The high-risk liability list. Illegal NDAs. Miller twisted his head, his wire-rimmed glasses askew. This woman is delusional. She assaulted me. 4. Elena screamed the number with piercing intensity. 9. 2. 0. 8. 5. 1. The hallway fell silent. Miller's face drained of color, transforming from ruddy anger to sickly gray in seconds. He stopped struggling, his body going rigid beneath Elena's weight. 4. 9. 2. 0. 8. 5. 1. Elena repeated the digits, her voice hoarse but unwavering. She met Sergeant Vance's eyes across the dim corridor. Dial it. Please. It's the only way to save my son. Vance lowered his weapon slightly, his weathered face creasing with skepticism. You want me to dial a random? It's not random. Elena's voice cracked. It's a lifeline. A dead man gave it to me. Please. Vance studied her for 3 long seconds. Beneath the grime and desperation, he saw something he hadn't encountered in years: raw, unvarnished truth. He holstered his weapon and walked to the wall-mounted landline near the exit. He punched in the 7 digits. The phone rang once. Twice. A voice answered, deep, authoritative, carrying the weight of institutional power. Justice Holloway's chambers. Vance's spine straightened reflexively. Supreme Court justices did not answer precinct phone calls. This is Sergeant Michael Vance, Precinct 12. I have a woman in custody who claims. Is her name Elena Reyes? Vance's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Is she unharmed? She's restrained, sir. Remove the restraints immediately. Has she activated the emergency protocol for the Thorn file? Vance fumbled for his keys, crossing to Elena and unlocking the handcuffs. His hands trembled. I don't understand, sir. You don't need to understand. Patch me through to your speaker system. Vance pressed the speakerphone button. The justice's voice filled the narrow hallway, echoing off institutional green paint and water-stained ceiling tiles. Ms. Reyes, this is Justice Holloway. I'm connecting a second caller. Static crackled through the line. Elena's breath caught in her throat. A new voice emerged, no longer gravelly or confused, but sharp with the confidence of someone who commanded boardrooms and shaped cities. Hello, Elena. Elias. Miller began to hyperventilate beneath the briefcase. You fed me when I had nothing, Elias continued, his words precise and measured. You protected me when violence was easier. You proved yourself uncorrupted by wealth or power. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to pass the test. Elena's voice emerged as a whisper. You were testing me. I was testing humanity. You're the first person who passed. A pause. Sergeant Vance, the man beneath Ms. Reyes is Administrator Charles Miller. His briefcase contains evidence of systematic fraud, child endangerment, and the theft of approximately $800 million from my estate. Place him under arrest. Vance moved with the sudden efficiency of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. He hauled Elena off Miller, snapped handcuffs onto the administrator's wrists, and wrenched the briefcase away. Miller wheezed, curling into a fetal position on the floor. The liability clipboard, Elena said, her voice gaining strength. It's in there. Proof they were using room 402 as a death trap. Vance opened the briefcase. His expression darkened as he scanned the documents inside: maintenance deferrals, forged inspection reports, a list of deceased patients whose families had never received death certificates. Jesus Christ! Vance dropped the briefcase and hauled Miller to his feet. Charles Miller, you're under arrest for corporate fraud, child endangerment, and attempted murder. Miller sagged in Vance's grip, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. You don't understand. The board. The board is next, Elias said through the speaker. My legal team is already en route to the hospital. 3 hours later, Elena stood in Mateo's new room, a private suite on the hospital's renovated wing, outfitted with equipment she couldn't have afforded in 10 lifetimes. Mateo slept peacefully beneath clean sheets, his breathing steady and strong. A team of specialists had examined him, declared him stable, and promised Elena he would make a full recovery. The Mateo Fund, they called it. Elias Thorne's first act upon his legal resurrection. Elena pressed her forehead against the window overlooking the concrete steps where her life had fractured and reassembled. The city sprawled beyond the glass, indifferent and eternal. 6 months later, Elena descended those same steps wearing professional attire that fit properly for the first time in her adult life. Patient Advocacy Director. The title still sounded foreign. A man sat on the landing where Elias had once trembled, young, hollow-eyed, wrapped in clothes too thin for the season. He clutched a cardboard sign advertising work for food. Elena sat beside him, pulling a gourmet sandwich from her bag. She pressed it into his cold hands. The men stared at her. I don't. Eat up. Elena smiled, the expression carrying hard-won wisdom. In this town, a lunch break is the most dangerous and rewarding job you'll ever have. She winked and walked toward the hospital's entrance, leaving the stranger holding bread and questions in equal measure. The revolving doors swallowed her into fluorescent brightness, and Elena disappeared into the building she had once stormed as a desperate mother. She emerged as something else entirely, a woman who understood that kindness wasn't weakness. It was currency. And in the economy of mercy, she had become extraordinarily wealthy,